This is the Auto Community Podcast. Hi, this is Erin Tullius. I'm here with Amy Yardley of Navigate Your Healing. Amy and I met, I guess it was about 7 years ago, I want to say. We started doing lots of things online in Facebook groups, although we've never met face to face, unfortunately. And so I've known Amy for quite some time. I find her to be an amazing resource, especially for parents who find their children on the autism spectrum or with various disabilities as they're getting older and trying to figure out what to do and how to navigate through that huge life change. So, Amy, I'm really happy to have you here.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. And I was having the same thoughts about, wow, I know Erin, but I don't know Erin because we've never actually even had a conversation like this before. It's all just been online.
I know. It's funny though, because I think, I feel as though, all of us as moms, taking care of our children, we grow together in these online groups. And I feel as though some of the women that I've met through all of these online groups have become really kindred spirits and people that I feel like I have known forever. So.
Right. And they, in essence, become your ride or die, really.
Right.
And it's not always a pleasant reality, but in fact, they know your kid better than your own family knows your kid sometimes.
Yeah.
And they can really identify with the challenges more. And so, and I think it's also almost like a class. When you go through school, you're the class of whatever. And so we do kind of grow together in that way. And it's always like, there are more people now, obviously, because the rates of autism and other complexities keep increasing. And so there are more and more parents who are kind of thrust into this environment. But I don't really know people who have just recently been diagnosed because I'm kindred, right, with the people who have had kids who have been on the spectrum for a while and who have been doing the things. And it layers, we have those of us who are maybe seniors, consider ourselves like seniors. And then there are people who are coming in and they're just in first grade, basically trying to really understand and orient themselves to what's going on, which is one of the reasons why I created Navigate Your Healing, because I still want people to know that there are those of us who have walked these steps before. And these are the things that have helped us. And if you can attach to these stories and do things in a more efficient way, in a way that's sooner and, more positively affects the expression of life for your child at a younger age, that's what it's all about. And, it's not about doing exactly what I did, but taking those larger lessons and understanding, kids do get better if they do X, Y, and Z. And maybe it doesn't look exactly like hers, but I'm going to try and figure out how to do that for my kid so that my kid doesn't have so many struggles. And that's important. Every single parent looks at that, right? Every single parent is trying to remove the struggles that their kids have, whether they're developmental disabilities or medical complexities or whatever it is.
Right. So taking it back to the beginning, because you mentioned about all of these new diagnoses. So many new kids getting diagnosed with autism spectrum disorders or, varying disabilities, autoimmune disease, and so many things out there. So how did all of this begin for you and for your son, Spencer?
Sure. Well, Spencer was not, he was born in 2002. And he was not one of these kids who had this sudden regression. So for me, when he was developing, in age 2, 3, and 4, there were things that were just off and weird, but then he was progressing in other areas. And at the time, for me, I didn't have any experience with knowing anyone with autism or any of these other conditions. And so I was just like, this kid's really hard-headed. He's really intense. He has some of these addictive almost qualities, right? And so eventually it got so off the rails that I did funnel through the early intervention and kind of child find types of things to have him evaluated. And then they were like, yeah, we think he does have autism, and you should pursue a medical diagnosis for that. So I did. That was just the route. You get kind of funneled into these ways, which is fine. At 4.5, he was officially diagnosed with autism spectrum. And the pediatrician said that he was moderate to severe, which again, I was like, what? Because he wasn't presenting in this way that I had this vision of what autism was. He was engaged. He was engaged with me. He just wasn't speaking the way that, other kids were speaking or developing language, what we might call naturally. And so anyway, that was kind of a shock. In retrospect, after having gone through all of the things for many years, I look back on it and I go, you know what? My kid had PANS, and through the PANS not being treated, pediatric acute onset of neuropsychiatric symptoms, neuroinflammation. So through that not being addressed, he did develop these manifestations of behaviors, which professionals at the time recognized as autism. And he still has many of these behaviors. I'm not saying he doesn't have autism, but, he's been much better with having all of the things treated. But I think his primary to start was PANS, and then was diagnosed as autism, because I don't think PANS was even something on very many people's radar in 2005 or 6 or 7.
Well, even so, my own son was born in 2007, not diagnosed till age 4.5. And even at that point, we had to take him to a pediatrician who we knew was already familiar with PANDAS and PANS in order to even get a diagnosis or a start of a diagnosis.
Right.
Even at that point, it was just a suggestion of a diagnosis. And
I remember when getting introduced to your family, right? Because we're in these circles. And then it was like, oh, this Dr. Tullius's kid has PANDAS. And we were like, what? And I don't want to say like we were happy, but it was almost like, oh my gosh, now we have this person who has this ability to influence even more people because of their position and where they're at and how they're operating, to be able to kind of like, people can look at it and go, wow, I think my kid might have PANDAS. And that was, I don't know, I just remember it being sort of almost a pivotal thing, being able to say, oh, wow, this guy's kid, because Steve was already working, right, with kids who had challenges.
Right.
Yeah. So it was I remember it very specifically.
That was around the same time that then I began the Saving Our Pandas group on Facebook, which, it started really as only about 25 to 30 moms who were looking for answers beyond the traditional, pharmacological concoctions that people were coming up with, which mainly consisted of antibiotics until adulthood. Right. And then IVIG or plasmapheresis, which are these incredibly invasive procedures with, maybe a 50-50, outcome at best. And so, that didn't sit well with me. And it really kind of, started, my personal journey as well. So, like I said, we all kind of grew together as this community, what started as 25 to 30 women, trying to figure things out. And I think at that point, you were already somebody that I was looking up to, like, okay, well, she's already got some of the things figured out at this point. So, but we all kind of piggybacked off of each other in order to assist, each other's kids.
It really was, as much as people like to complain about Facebook, it honestly was the thing that allowed us to come together and to share our experiences, to create this massive sort of research bank where people could say, hey, I've tried this. My kid is like this. Is your kid like this? You might want to try this. And watching people, I was the same way. People would be like, well, have you tried IVIG? And I'm like, in all these stories that I've heard of people, it doesn't seem like the kids that are helped are kids like mine. Therefore, I'm going to discern and not put this at the top of my list because I just don't think it's going to be worth it in terms of the effort to try to get it and to pay for it. And I don't think in the end, it's going to be what my kid needs. And so, I know there's a lot of people that get overwhelmed, and, people who aren't like us, they'll look at us and like, how do you do what you do? And I'm like, how do I not do that? I mean, I'm just trying to connect with my village. My village isn't here where I am physically, but this is my virtual village. And this is the wisdom, the collective wisdom that I can pour into and I can take from when I need it. And so, yeah, Spencer was diagnosed with autism at 4.5. In retrospect, I know that it was PANS. And then later, through even more investigation and just doing all the things to try and help your kid, puberty was really difficult for Spencer, really, really difficult. It just when we were feeling like we got things kind of, okay, we can do this. Testosterone entered the equation, and it just blew everything up into a massive PANS flare. Discovered that he did have Lyme, which was something that I had considered and probably figured that he did, but I wasn't, again, convinced that going after all these things was where he was at the moment. So we did confirm Lyme, and then did a bunch of treatments for Lyme. And then also through the course of trying to find things out, we discovered that he had hereditary hemochromatosis, which is a genetic condition where his body converts and absorbs too much iron from the diet. So he had massive iron stores already in his tissues, in his blood. And, it's a really nasty condition. Most people don't get it diagnosed until later in life, when they're starting to have all these issues, but it impacts the liver, it impacts the heart, it impacts the brain. It creates massive amounts of oxidative stress. And so it was just another piece of the puzzle. So I always describe Spencer, I don't like to chase after the diagnoses. And I'm like, oh God, another diagnosis. I don't want one. But, I just describe it as medically complex. And, and from that, sometimes we have behavioral complexities, because as he's feeling better, amazingly enough, the behaviors that he has, go way down, and he's more connected, and has an easier time in his world, and the world is not so complex. As his body feels worse, we get neuroinflammation, whatever's going on, I can always tell he's not feeling well, because that's when the anxiety increases, and that's when the behaviors happen. And through, one of the things that's really helped me is to not chase after those symptoms as they show up, because it's like, I look more to like, what is the root cause? Why is this symptom coming back? And I think that's one of the things that new moms spend a lot of time doing, is really chasing down and trying to get rid of the end manifested symptom. And it's like, I get it. I get that you want to do that because it scares you and it's driving you crazy. But if you can just try to figure out the root cause, you're going to save yourself years versus just doing whack-a-mole with these symptoms.
Right. So looking back at, now Spencer is an adult. And so getting to that point, obviously, I think there was probably a point in time where you realized, okay, I think that I'm going to need to be a caregiver for my son on a more permanent basis. And this is going to be a lifelong, a lifelong condition of my, existence. And so at this point, obviously there had to have been a point where you had to acknowledge that and understand what the next steps were. So looking back at that, what do you wish you would have known, many years ago that maybe you could have implemented as he got older?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. There was a point, in the beginning, you're like, I'm going to do all the things. And the goal is that he's going to be independent and functional, right? And so you just kind of like work. And then after a period of time, you go, I'm thinking this isn't going to work out like I had expected. And we come to that kind of classic place of conflict of expectation. I'm expecting that my life is going to turn out this way, or I'm expecting that motherhood would have turned out this way. And the life that I got is not the life that I expected. And when we have that conflict of expectation, we can either surrender to it and then move into the next phase, or with our own stuff going on, we fight it. We steep ourselves in sadness and grief about it. We feel all the emotions about it, but the time that it takes us to move through that is based on the individual. And, my son, I really feel like he had been injured by pharmacological products. And so I had a lot of anger about that as well. And, and I'm an Aries. So I was like, no, this isn't how it's going to go. So it did, but when I would say in puberty, probably about 14 or 15, it was definitely this like, well, I can't live in this land of thinking that I'm going to, get him to the point where he's not going to need me, or at least it's going to take a lot longer than what I had preferred. And because he continues to grow and do things every day, just as every single human on the planet Earth does. So,
sure.
They don't magically stop learning at a certain age. So it's just one of those things where it was like, oh, you know what? I am going to have to do this for a lot longer than what I had expected. And I'm lucky. I live in a state that provides a fair amount of supports for adults who have disabilities. And when he turned 18, he was able to participate into the adult services, which then allowed me to be his paid caretaker, which is a massive relief, right? Because for all these years, I was his caretaker. He was not in public school. We were doing things on our own, right. But I was not able to work and earn money. So just to be able to have that gave me a great deal of kind of ability to exhale, because sure. I was like, I can be his caretaker and I can resign myself to this because I can make a living at doing it. And that is my career now, even though it was my, I'm his mom, I'm his caretaker, and I do receive, remuneration for it. And right. So that makes it a little bit easier. But there's still that mental part. It was like, oh, okay, so this is always going to kind of be this way. I am the forever mom.
Right.
And, the nest is always going to be full. And so, that puts all sorts of things on your plate about, well, what happens when I'm no longer able to care for the nest when I get older? Right. And so there's this continuation along the spectrum of this life where, you have certain priorities. And I know when people, their kids are 5, they're not thinking about when their kids are 20 or 25, or if they do think about it, it's absolute fear, right? About the future.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I speak to clients all the time who literally do. I mean, they might have kids that are, maybe a little bit older, like 10, 11 years old, but they're already thinking, okay, this is going to be a lifelong, I'm going to have to be a lifelong caregiver. And I know that, and I'm having trouble accepting that.
Yeah.
I think there is too, there's a certain amount of grief that happens when you realize that, perhaps your own child won't be able to experience some of the things that you experienced that were, some of the joys of being a child, right? Sure. And so I think as more and more of those milestones start to pass, I do think it enters people's minds quite a bit more. But is there any reassurance that you can offer to parents in that position?
Yeah, I think, one of the things that happened when Spencer was in puberty and puberty is a natural age to redefine your parenting relationship with your kid. We do it with all the kids. And teenagers, they don't come to you and say, Mom, I need more independence. Teenagers get, just really horrible behavior-wise, and they start doing things.
I have a 14-year-old, so I can relate to that statement.
Yeah, they do things in the way that they know how to create this sense with you that it's okay that you guys separate, right? And that's really what that whole time period is about, because as mothers, we would keep them forever, right? And puberty forces every single parent to come to this place where it's like, oh, you know what? Maybe I don't want to be your mom forever because not the way you're treating me right now. And so when Spencer went through puberty, I was very intentional about changing my relationship with him, because I knew that he was behaviorally doing what he could do. But obviously, he doesn't have the experience and the knowledge and all of these things. I'm the adult. I'm the one that needs to really kind of take the lead on this. And so I was like, okay, we're going to be here for a long time together. And obviously this mother boy thing isn't working anymore. So how can I change this relationship and this dynamic in a way that supports him being who he is and also supports me being who I am? And we can kind of renegotiate this space where we both have a higher expression of life because of it. And so it really was like understanding and kind of putting away that whole mother energy. It's like, okay, I can bring it out at times, but it needs to not be present all the time, because what Spencer needs is he needs to feel that he has autonomy, that he has self-determination. And no, he doesn't have the ability to say to somebody, I want to go do this. That's still an emerging skill for him. So I have to be very kind of nuanced and just really open to watching what he's doing and to giving him as much opportunity of risk to do the things that are new to him or the things that it looks like he wants to do, and not forcing him to do the things that I think he should be doing or that other people think he should be doing. So Spencer is 19, and a lot of people who, are familiar with our story, but are not, they don't have disability in their life. They will sometimes ask us like, well, is Spencer going to get a job? I'm always like, well, I don't think Spencer wants a job. And the idea is that, of course, we need to funnel disabled people into all of these programs because that's, people work. And so we should just funnel, well, there's there's voc rehab or these other things or these programs. And I was like, I really don't think Spencer wants to do that. And that's okay, because he is an individual. And if he wants to work, I will do everything I can to get him into a place where he can work or do something that looks like work. But in all honesty, he's never going to be employed to, support himself. And he has all these other supports in place that if he were to earn a lot of money would make these things go away. So it's really a matter of when your kids get older and they have disabilities, I really want people to understand that you don't have to take the traditional path that people have, was like, well, of course you go over here. Well, no, I don't want to have him go over there. He doesn't want to sit at a table with a bunch of other people putting stuff together. That's not what he wants. And just because he's disabled doesn't mean that he can't do what he wants, and right now he's very comfortable staying at home. I create his programming, but the programming is very low stress because, that's just what he needs. And it's okay to choose that path that is not in those traditional things. Now, I've had the benefit, if you will, of homeschooling him since second grade. And there is this time frame where you have to, as a forever parent, it can be really intense to spend that much time with your kid 24/7. Or 22/7 if you get
I'm familiar.
Yeah, you get a couple breaks.
As a homeschooling mom.
It was so hard in the beginning because you feel like you're getting depleted because you don't have any time to yourself. So I wasn't caring for my own self-care in the beginning. I recognize that. And over a period of time, I figured out how to balance for me, how to support me while also doing this. But there's a lot of parents I know whose kids are in the public school system who, when they get to be aged out of that, then they're going to be forced with this decision, right, of how do oh my gosh, my kid's home all day. I'm like, yes, he's home all day. And, that's where the fear and the worry comes into play. When people are in fear and worry, then they don't necessarily plan. They just fear and worry about it. And then, that's why taking care of ourselves and really having these conversations like you and I are having today, it's like, no, the best thing that you can do is to really just be honest with how you feel about it. And then try to figure out, well, what do I want life to look like for me in 5 years and 10 years and 15 years? And what do I think my child wants in 5 years or 10 years or 15 years? I know Spencer wants to live with me right now. And you know what? If I would be perfectly happy if he wanted to go live on his own or live in a different set of circumstances, I'm just open to that. I'm trying not to have my mother energy overwhelm everything because it can have a tendency to do that.
Yeah. So I guess at this point, what would you say was the biggest challenge that you faced as Spencer was growing into adulthood? Was there specific challenges regarding some of the processes involved with going through, the state and getting I'm assuming it's a permanent disability. Were there challenges there? Were there challenges with you being his caretaker? Did you come up against, some judgment or, from either people in your circle or anything like that? What would you say were some of those challenges?
I think it's all kind of challenging because it's new, right? And so you can't just roll into it doing business as usual, right? So the whole paperwork process and getting into the systems of care and support, like Social Security and then the state system of disability, can be very complex, and there's a lot of moving parts, and it took a lot of attention to detail. And I honestly created the plan for that a year before Spencer turned 18. And I had mapped out exactly what I would need. And honestly, probably about 6 months before he turned 18 is when all of the things started to happen, the applications to this place, and, part A can't happen until part C or D is done. And they're all sort of interconnected. So that was a challenge. But again, I had done a lot of, I don't want to say homework, but I talked to people because I knew this from our experience, right? It's like,
right.
I don't know what the process is. I need to find somebody who's been through this process so I can ask them these questions. And I would sit down and I would talk with parents who'd already been through this and say, what was your experience? What things did what were the hiccups? What do I need to know? What can I do? And just really seeking out that information versus waiting for somebody to tell me, because they're not going to, right? Nobody's going to come to you and say, this is what you need. You're going to have to be like, hey, I need to know information. And what do I not know? Because those are always the hardest questions, right? It's like, I don't know what to ask.
Right. So were there some specific questions that maybe you didn't know to ask that then came up later?
Yeah, I think a lot of people, my background was already in social services, so I knew a lot about the systems that are there behind the scenes to help people. But I think if you're living in a state and you're not already accessing or you're not able to access Medicaid services for your child with a disability, you need to connect with people who understand what's available in your state and just ask those questions and say, do we have waiver programs for adults with disability? How do I apply for that? What is needed? What's the experience? Are there ways to be a paid caregiver for my adult child? And in most states, there are, if they have those programs. Because the child's 18, they're now considered, a financial entity in and of themselves. You're no longer financially responsible for them. Just really finding out about what's in your state, or if you're in a place like California, it's by county. So you have to take the initiative to figure those things out. And what it's called in my state is called something completely different in someone else's state. So it's really like, okay, well, I need to find somebody who's accessing SSI so I can ask them these, what's required? What was the process like? It's going to take 4 to 6 months for that application to be processed, even if it's a simple one, so you have to kind of be prepared for these sorts of things. In certain states, for Spencer, guardianship was an appropriate selection for him. And so in my state, for the most part, most people used attorneys. And I think they actually need attorneys in the state. Other states, you don't need an attorney. It's all based on your individual state as to what's happening. So you really do have to connect with local people when your child is moving from child to adult, because the programs of support are completely different. And again, the more you can talk to people, you discover, oh, I didn't even know that program existed. I know a lady here in Idaho. She worked in developmental disability agency. She had an adult disabled son. It wasn't autism. It was another diagnosis. And working in that system, she did not know that she could be the paid caregiver for her adult child. And her adult child was like almost 40 years old. So
wow.
It's like, wait a minute. I mean, we go on this assumption that people are going to know. So there's so much out there that you probably don't know what you don't know. So you just have to keep asking questions.
Yeah.
That would be the big thing.
Let's kind of talk about something that I know that is on a lot of people's minds as they get older, as their kids get older, what to do in the case eventually of the death of a parent. So if your child outlives you and they still are in need of care, I know it's a tough topic emotionally, but obviously it's something that we all need to think about. And so that, our child is not only prepared for, whatever needs to happen in that case, but also so that they're emotionally prepared. So is there a way that you've been able to identify to prepare him and then to prepare all the circumstances?
Yeah, that's kind of like I haven't really completely tackled that myself because I'm really just kind of finding the groove with where we are now. But it is on my, larger list of things. Like I need to have a succession plan in place. And I'm the youngest child in my family. So I don't even, and Spencer's dad is older than I am. So, it's like after me, I have to look outside of the family, really, as to potentially who may be willing to do this, to step in and to be guardian, not necessarily be caretaker, but guardian. Obviously I take on the roles of guardian and caretaker in everyday sort of stuff. The pure reality of the situation is that when I am gone, the state needs to know who is a potential guardian, which would be someone I would appoint or say, yes, this is the person I want next in line. And if I don't have that, the state's going to appoint someone for Spencer. And that person is going to be someone who doesn't know Spencer, but is going to step in and act on his behalf. The other thing that would happen if I don't have a succession plan in is his living arrangements, right? So we're talking about if I don't make plans and take care of this and I die, then the state will take him and put him into probably basically a group home, whichever group home is available. And so my next thing now is doing that. I have to curate, well, what is his circle of care? Who is that going to be? And, it's a tough question. I don't want to just ask somebody, say, hey, will you be Spencer's guardian when I die? Because, those questions kind of change relationship dynamics because that person might say no, right?
Right.
And then you're like, oh, this person said no. Oh, no. In my mind, I'm kind of formulating this idea where it's more like a board of directors, where I want to put together a group of people who can work together in Spencer's best interest. And that way the responsibility is kind of diffused among them. And that maybe somebody within that group would be like, yeah, I will be the guardian on record, for doing the things.
I think something else. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just saying that's like my best picture of what would happen.
Well, and I do think, we're at this very critical juncture because of all the kids that are now, coming through the system and going to age out at some point. And do we have the long-term care even available for all of these kids? Should something happen to their parents? And I don't know enough about the system to be able to say definitively yes or no, but my gut feeling is that absolutely we do not have even half of what we need, just based on, what I know about services even within the school system. So, the availability needs to be there too. And so, I do think that it's something, obviously that's probably a larger conversation that would involve, speaking with people in social services or in government positions that would allow them to expand those services. But, I do think that's part of it too, is becoming an advocate for your child once they get this diagnosis. You really do become a lifelong advocate, even if they're not necessarily needing lifelong care. But you're constantly trying to figure out, what's best for your child, just like every other parent. It's no different. I do think that's a huge point. And then as far as emotional prep, I don't know. Obviously it sounds like you guys haven't really tackled that yet, but do you have any ideas or anything for going through with that? How might you prep him emotionally
Well, and I think for me, for Spencer, I mean, that's a very abstract thought, right? Like what's going to
Right.
happen when I die? And Spencer is very literal and right
Right.
here, like what is happening right now. I mean, I just recently started talking to him about who the next door neighbors were, and that if there was an emergency and he needed help, he could go talk to them. I mean, so, and he's still kind of like
Right.
trying to grapple that idea, like, oh, we have an emergency. And, so I don't want to talk about like, well, the house is on fire, because then he's going to think the house is on fire, So, I mean, it's like this whole sort of thing with him. I'm not sure. I certainly know right now is not the time to talk about when I die and what's going to happen, because he's not going to understand that.
Sure.
So we'll be working towards that. And I'm always in the back of my mind again going, would he, I'm sure, he would adapt. It wouldn't be what I would want, but he would probably adapt. I think ideally for me, what I see for him, and this is part of it too, is like, don't think just because group homes exist that that's the only thing your kid can do. Right? We have to think outside of the box.
Right.
And so for me, I'm like, how do I preserve the property, the home that I live in a way where when I'm gone, it still remains in ownership. That's not his ownership, but it's ownership in a way that is there for him to continue to live in, and the supports can come to help him.
Right.
Or he has roommates that come into his home. So, those are the types of things that I'm continually marinating in and thinking about, and doing things like, well, do we need a real estate trust? Is this what a real estate trust would do? And how does a special needs trust work into this? And those are other things too, a special needs trust for funneling the money that happens when people die, right? Because you have assets and
Right.
you might have some life insurance. You don't want that going directly to your child who has Social Security, because it will make them ineligible for Social Security. And then they're really going to be screwed. So, there are just continue to be a whole lot of moving parts with it. And there's the technical, the objective parts, like a special needs trust. And then there's the emotional parts of like, geez, do I prepare my kid, or do we just, I can only control so much. And there's a lot in this life that I can't control. So maybe you just be like, well, that's it. Time's up. I don't know. I do the best that I can to get the paths laid out. I did just recently purchase a workbook off of Amazon. I think the title of it's like, well, I'm gone. Here's what you need to know, because I was like, I do need to get this stuff out. I have a lot of stuff in my head about what Spencer needs, who his doctors are, what his care plan is for A, B, C, and D, and I do need to have that stuff just at least written out in narrative form, so that when somebody does come in, they can find this book and say, okay, here's what this person needs for their care. And that's the best that I can do for Spencer.
So I know that, you mentioned earlier about letting your own self-care slip when Spencer was younger. And I know that that's a huge issue for lots and lots of parents in the same position. And I also know that it's something that you're very passionate about and you like to teach about in your program. So could you tell me, how do you prioritize self-care for you during all of this?
Yeah. Well, I think first and foremost is that a lot of people, and I had this idea as well, was that self-care was a destination or kind of like a pampering activity, right? And that was self-care. Me being able to leave the house is self-care, or I have to leave in order to have self-care. And when you're parenting a forever child, that doesn't happen a lot of times, So, or when you leave the house, you have, I've got to go to 3 different stores and I got to return this and I got to, take care of all these activities. So I really was like, okay, well, if I can't leave the house regularly to kind of recharge myself, do I just never recharge myself? Or are there things that I can do while I'm living my life that can help recharge myself? And then I was like, well, obviously there are things that I can do. So I set about, and I knew all these things happen because my kid is so chronically in sympathetic dominance. He's in chronic fight or flight. So I've been doing all these things for him, but not for myself. And that's a classic mistake that parents make a lot of times too, is that they think that I have to do everything and give everything to my kid and my family, and I'll give to myself last. And I was like, no, we can do it all at the same time. You can care for your kid and yourself. And so I went about just starting doing different techniques and collecting different techniques and strategies to help lower my overall stress load while living my life, and then increasing my movements and using exercises, movements and postures and holds to bring on a parasympathetic response, which is our rest and digest. And then the most critical piece, though, is working on the mindset.
So maybe one or two just quick things that people could start doing today, without having to, learn an entirely new skill, or, study something, about a new supplement or something like that. Maybe one or two like tidbits of things that people could do for self-care.
Right. Well, one of the things that I do, I have a free guide that's available on the navigateyourhealing.com. So I outline 3 activities that you can start doing right now. They don't cost any money. And that's like the basic for me is it has to cost $0 to very low money. And I'm not a fan of recommending singular products for everyone, because no one product is going to work well for everyone. So the first one is just quite simply using your breath. Our breath is so powerful. But also to that is just having that awareness and understanding like, yeah, I am stressed out. Is it okay that I'm this stressed out? No, it's not okay. Am I ready to not be so stressed out? And then just making that intentional and consistent, just like working out. If we wanted to lose weight or we wanted to get fit, you don't just, by buying a membership to a gym doesn't automatically make you lose weight, right? You have to go to the gym. You have to change the way you eat. You have to change the way you move. And toning our nervous system is the same way, but oftentimes we're not taught about these things to do. So the first and foremost is the breath. And it's the slow breath in, and you hold at the top, and then the slow breath out and holding at the bottom. And the slowing down and being intentional about the breath brings on a parasympathetic response. And every single time you can get a parasympathetic response in your day is a win, because you're not going to be like instantly relaxed for 4 days after that. No, but just like you're not going to be instantly lose 5 pounds by eating, a stalk of celery. It doesn't work that way. Where you have to
really? Dang it.
recalibrate. We're recalibrating our nervous system, and you can't do it without your breath. So, and your breath is free, and you're literally doing it all day long. You already have that power. You just have to do it intentionally, do it with intention and be consistent. And you can do it all the time. You just, right?
Yeah, I love that.
And it's very calming. And I do that all day long. I'm breathing in very intentional ways. And even just the way we're holding our body with our posture, that would be the other thing. In this day of electronics, our shoulders are hunched over, our heads are forward. We have that thing called tech neck, right? So our bodies are all kind of crunched in. That body posture tells our nervous system that we are in defense mode. So just by being kind of curled in like that tells our nervous system that we're in fight or flight. So what you do, you drop your shoulders, you bring them back, you drop your shoulders, you put your arms down, and you breathe. And that simple signal tells the nervous system, oh, I'm safe. And the more I can tell my body and my nervous system throughout the course of my day, hey, I'm safe. That is self-care. Because my hair is not going to look better. My skin's not going to look better. I'm not going to digest things better. All of these things don't work better unless our nervous system is in a state of rest and digest. So first and foremost, we work on all of these things to bring our nervous system into a state of balance. And the benefit of that as well, and I just want to say, isn't just the bodies, but where our brain can start to process the world more appropriately, right? So we have more whole brain functioning. We're not reacting with emotions. We're not getting triggered into our emotions by every little thing. We have more cognitive flexibility. I have more ability to look at things and be like, you know what? It's okay. It's not going to bother me today.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. It's so important for us to be able to do things in the moment, especially when you're being surrounded by someone, 24/7, which
Yes.
many of us parents are. So, Amy, I've really appreciated you coming on today. I'd love it if you would share, where can other people who want to learn more about what you're doing find you?
Yeah, absolutely. So my website is navigateyourhealing.com. And on there, like I mentioned, I have a free offer guide that gives you 3 techniques that you can start doing today to work on your nervous system. And I also have a free Facebook group for parental support and self-care realm and all of that sort of thing. And then I have a paid membership group where you can, if you're interested in those strategies, more specifically, you have instant access to my course, From Barely Surviving to Thriving, as well as a private coaching group to help people implement those things and bring intention and consistency to their lives with that.
Thank you so much, Amy. I've really enjoyed actually having a conversation with you. All right. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Take care.